Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I am Mr. Lydell, and you're here for the presentation on Black History Month. Today is the second day of Black History Month. And I did this once yesterday for a group, and I started by saying yesterday morning, I don't know how many students have had psychology in here or not, but I had a Pavlovian experience. My phone next to my bed dinged, and like one of Pavlov's dogs, I responded to that ding. I picked up my phone and saw that the Boston Globe was alerting me that there was an article, an op-ed yesterday from someone named Coleman Hughes. And Coleman Hughes said in his op-ed, or the title was, "Color blindness remains the best," I'm going to miss the word and paraphrase the phrase, best cure for, or the best solution for anti-racism, right? So that was his kind of position, that we must in this society be color blind. And knowing what that person has written before and done before, I recognize that this person has long been an opponent of anti-racism. So it was interesting to see. This is an article on the very first day of op-ed, first day of Black History Month, that is saying such. Mr. Hughes happens to be someone like me, African American, and to hear that kind of position on the first day of Black History Month was, well, disheartening. But nonetheless, I came in to work ready to do my thing with my presentation, and it made me think about what had happened the week before when someone said in New Hampshire, maybe you know this person, heard this, said that we do not live in a racist nation. There's never been a racist nation. So this person says. I don't agree with that. Maybe you've heard of this. Who knows who said that last week? Yes. Nikki Haley. Yes, who's running for president, I might add. I'll briefly editorialize myself by saying she knows that's not true. Nikki Haley, who grew up in South Carolina on the campus of an HBCU because her father was a biologist, couldn't find work elsewhere because her father, like her, was of Indian descent and wore a turban. And she understood that he couldn't find work elsewhere. She grew up in a place that had nothing but African Americans in it, and should understand their existence in this country. But nevertheless, she made that statement hoping to curry favor with those folk in her particular party that enjoy racism. That being said, move on to the next slide, please. I want to acknowledge some of this country's racism by showing you this marker. This is a marker that is just down the road from my house in North Grafton, and it says that this parcel of land, 4.5 acres that it stands on, represents the only parcel of land in the entire Commonwealth that has never kind of fallen out of the hands of the indigenous people. And, well, fallen out of the hands would be passive language, never taken from indigenous people. Again, evidence of racism in this country. We also sit, in my case, stand in a place that was once occupied primarily by indigenous folk, you know, the Americans. And in the case of Wayland, it is the Massachusetts and the Pawtucket folk who lived in this region prior to folk from Europe coming and, well, another euphemism, settling the place. This past summer, I was fortunate enough to take a trip with my wife to the Azores, Cape Verde, Cabo Verde, and Portugal. My wife's family is from Cabo Verde, and this picture is of me on the roof of their home on Mata Grande, is a mountain on the island of Brava, Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde is an archipelago, collection of islands in the Atlantic Ocean just west of Africa. And behind me, this little indentation right here, you can't see it very clearly, but it's the port of Brava. And the port of Brava brings in ships all the time. You can't fly a plane there. There was once an airport, but it does not exist anymore. That's the boat to get to this place. As I'm standing here, this moment, taking a selfie of me, myself, obviously, my father-in-law standing a little bit to that side of me, and he points a little bit further to my right and your left, to a place where there are still evidence of cannons that were there. Cannons that were directed down toward that port. And those cannons were there, these are his own words, to shoot cannonballs at the pirates and pirate ships that would sometimes enter that port. Well, for those who don't know, Cabo Verde, Cape Verde, was a place where Portuguese took West Africans, Senegalese, Ghanaian people, and forced them to work, enslaved them. We know that enslavement happened around the globe in various places, but in this case, Portuguese brought West Africans here for enslavement, also took the crops that they tilled out of the port as well on ships, and of course, as is the case with chattel slavery, there were folk who were created through relations, often involuntary relations, rape in these cases as well. So therefore we have the people who are an amalgamation of both Portuguese and West Africans being Cape Verdeans. Anyway, back to his idea of pirates and pirate ships. Given what he said about the cannons pointing down to that port to attack pirate ships, how can we determine who is a pirate and who is not? This is not Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a big giant black flag with a skull and crossbones on it. How do we determine who is a pirate and who is not? And then what is a pirate? First, let's start with what's a pirate? Anybody know what a pirate is? Let's grow a brave hand. Anyone who wants to do that? Anyone? Let's see who's brave in here. No wrong answer. I guess there is. This is open to adults too. If you want to raise your hand, it's fine. Yes, what's a pirate?
I might say someone who takes and makes money off of something that doesn't belong to them.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Etsy.
Etsy. Etsy's a pirate?
No, all of that, but I feel like a pirate has to have a boat involved.
Oh, is it? Maybe, possibly. Okay, well, I'll give you that. But takes what does not belong to them and makes profit off of it. I'll use that example. So given what my father-in-law said, cannonballs being aimed down on the port, and we know that there might be pirate ships coming in to steal what's on ships, coming unobtrusively. Thank you. Who's a pirate and who's not? Or are they all pirates? Are ships bringing people who are stolen pirate ships? Are ships that are exporting ill-gotten goods made by the people who were stolen? Are those pirate ships too? I said they're all pirate ships. But in that moment, my father-in-law wasn't thinking that way. He was seeing, maybe momentarily, the world through the eyes of the Portuguese. Which is frustrating. And I didn't call him out on that because I was staying in his home for 3 weeks. That. Anyway, moving right along. I'm going to hear now a little bit about history from someone named John Henry Clark, who was a historian. Who
people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The most valuable lesson I would learn is that when you address a people by their right name, that name must relate to land, history, and culture. All people go back to the geography of their original origin and identify themselves, no matter where they live on the face of the earth. We have overused the word black because black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. You can call an Italian white, but that don't tell you anything about him. We are the only people who seem to have lost that all essential trait of geographical and historical reference.
So I wouldn't admit that we've lost anything. I think, again, that's past birth were not allowed to interact with folks who spoke the same language often. Were shuffled in such a way that did not allow for the transmission generationally of information, cultural habits, the mores or values of their people, and it was not lost, but in many ways taken. We're going to spend some time today talking about some of those folks that you may not have heard of in your classes. I'm going to give you a better picture of who Black people are, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but also other parts of the world. One thing that we will not do is really focus too much time on they call it Black Mountain Rushmore. If you're ever learning about Black history in public schools in the United States, if you've heard about these people, this is the 101 or the basic, the kindergarten of learning of Black history. I think most of us probably know who these people are. Anybody think they can name all four? I'm sure there's a few hands will pop up. Yes, right here. Can you name all four? You're on the spot. Imani.
Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
Harriet Tubman.
Yes.
Martin Luther King.
Yes.
Rosa Parks.
Yes, easy. We know these people, right? So a lot of attention focused on these folks. The left two, of course, were during the time of enslavement in this country, were abolitionists and fought against the institution of slavery. Frederick Douglass, born into slavery himself, learned how to read and to write, which is a thing that was illegal at the time for someone who looked like him. Also was a wonderful orator and friend of Abraham Lincoln. Harriet Tubman, many folks know that she's the conductor of the Underground Railroad, led many people to freedom. One of her famous quotes is, "I've freed hundreds of slaves. Could have freed hundreds more if they'd known they were slaves." There was a movie that came out a few years ago that I had not seen about her, but I read some snippets and saw some snippets on it. It kind of frustrated me because the person who directed the movie said that she wanted to take slavery out of the role of being the villain of this movie. Oh, that's interesting. Well, who is the villain of the movie, or one of the villains? Well, there's a character that was created for that movie who talks about being a bounty hunter and wanting to track down Harriet Tubman. And he says that with his newly found riches, he will use that money to buy some white whores. That character in the movie was not a composite character, it was a fictional character. And in true Freudian fashion, they've named that character Bigger Long. So to think about someone crafting a movie about the life of Harriet Tubman, where slavery is not the evil it looms, but a fictional Black character who has lust on his mind, is frustrating. That's why I have not seen it. Maybe at one point I'll muster up the strength to see it. Anyway, that's a little aside. MLK, we all know Martin Luther King Jr., the only person born in this country to have a national holiday in this country named after him, and proud brethren of Morehouse College like me. And Rosa Parks, famous for the Montgomery bus boycott, not moving from her seat, surrendering it to move back to the bus, which many folks don't know was planned that she do that. There was a person who did that before her named Claudette Colvin, who was 15 years old, who did it, but she was not seen as the right person to lead the movement, or the face of the movement, because she was 15 and pregnant. So this is replicated with Rosa Parks doing it later on down the line. Rosa Parks also being associated with the nonviolent civil rights movement, but she herself did not preach nonviolence. She kept many weapons in her home, as did her husband, hoping to prevent any tragedies of folks invading their homes, not a person who believed in nonviolence. So we're not going to talk about them, but when we focus on the years 1619 or 1523, anybody know what the significances of those years are with regard to Black history? 1619 or 1523? No? Raise your hand. Squeaky shoe sound. Yes!
1619, first supposed ship of chattel slavery starting in America in our colonies.
Yes, in Virginia, 20 some odd people were brought to Virginia shores from Africa, initially for indentured servitude. But that is from the English perspective. The English did that in Virginia. Prior to that, in 1523, the Spanish did the same thing, but in Florida. We won't focus on either of those 2 years because it does in some ways centralize both Spain and England. We're not going to do that today. We're not centralizing Europe today. The thing you saw on the very first slide, this image is what's called a Sankofa bird, which is an Akan symbol. Akan is a group from West Africa, which is now Ghana. And this bird symbolizes, you can see the full bird, its legs are moving forward while it turns back to grab a seed or an egg. That seed or that egg is history. That means you cannot move forward without understanding your past, without grabbing a nugget from your past, without capturing the cultural nuggets that are important to know to guide you throughout life, being who you are. And it's also, in some depictions, it's also cyclical. The bird has a roundish shape, showing me that history itself, or life itself, is not in a straight line. It's non-linear, it's cyclical. You go through events that repeat over time. Maybe not repeat. They say that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme sometimes. So let's take a second to grasp onto a certain concept. We all see the clock in the corner of the room, 12-hour clock. Got 60 little hashes on it, hash marking minutes. Let's for a second suspend that thought that we think of this as 60 minutes. No, put that aside for a second. Let's think of every single hash as being not a minute, but every hash being a century. If that's the case, then that clock represents not 60 minutes, but 6,000 years. And the folks I talked about before on the Mount Rushmore would be in the last 2 minutes of the clock. So let's say we're at noon or midnight, and we go back one hash mark. If this year is 2024, one little hash is what year? If we think of each hash as being 100 years, and we're at straight up and down, midnight or noon, we go back one little mark, what year will we be in? Thank you, 1924. One more, 1824. All right, so everyone we talked about in the Mount Rushmore is those last 2 minutes or last 2 centuries of the clock. I submit to you that the history we're talking about today goes well beyond the last 200 years, but before the last 200 years. There's actually 7,000 years between a new and a clock, right? One clock cannot contain all the things we talked about today. And then one more, we just talked about that. All right, so again, in this situation, if straight up and down noon or midnight is where we are, we're going back it's 400 years, right? It means it would be 1624. That's another example of that. Where is this? Anybody know what this thing is? Image. Oh, you know already? That's right, I told you already, right? So you know because I told you as well. Anybody who have not told know where this is and what it is and how old it is. All right, you know, Erica, tell us. It's on the African continent, it's on the eastern half. It's actually 800 miles south of the Giza Plateau, which is modern day Egypt. But south of that, goes to Sudan. It's called Nabta Playa. Folks in the corner, no. Shh, no. Nabta Playa is its name. And it's 7,000 years old, right? It's ancient, and it was used for purposes much like Stonehenge, right? You've seen Stonehenge in Europe, in England. It's used to chart time, right? Or create calendars, to signify certain dates of the year when the sun or the moon would shine through different columns. Again, this is old, so it's worn down. It used to be tall columns. When the sun would shine through various points on this structure, it would denote a certain time of year, the time to plant crops, right? It's 7,000 years old. And not far from here, there's evidence that the people who lived in this area also knew about our solar system, which, again, being 7,000 years old, is a lot before Galileo or Copernicus, but they're not given that type of attention. What's this? We have some math teachers here. Maybe they know, math students. What is this right here? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I heard someone say Pythagorean theorem. Who agrees with that? Raise your hand. The Pythagorean theorem. Yes, keep those hands up. Awesome. When did Pythagoras live? Anybody know his birth and death dates? I give you the freedom to break out a device that will allow you to find that information. Yes, sir. You raised your hand. Your hand was down there. Who knows when Pythagoras lived? He lived 100 years. He said 400, 500 BC.
Somewhere around that.
All right, so somewhere in that neighborhood, it was in the 400s BCE. That's true, right? So if this is his theorem, right? Well, next slide, please. If that's his theorem, how did these things get created around 2700 BCE? More than 2,000 years before he lived on the planet. If that's his theorem, he's the one who actually created it. It doesn't make any sense. Unless he had a time machine, too. I don't think he had that, right? Not to disparage Pythagoras, but he did not figure out that theorem. He wasn't the first one, not by a long shot. This is 2,200 years or so before he walked the earth that this was put into play, and even perfected, because they're still standing there. This guy contributed to that theorem. I think it was Imhotep, Asclepius, and if you read ancient Greek, they'll refer to someone named Asclepius, which is Imhotep's name in Greek. He's known as the world's first genius, or universal genius, mathematician, architect, and man of medicine. He didn't just create a pyramid, he also created 50 different surgical procedures for the body, including cataract surgery, and developed a birthing chair. He's someone who's widely regarded in the ancient world, but somehow, some way, his story has gotten lost over time. Read the ancient Greeks, they worshiped this guy, literally, because he existed 2,000 years ago. He was 2,000 years old when they kind of came on the scene. Next slide. If you are someone who aspires to become a physician, at some point you'll take the Hippocratic Oath, named after Hippocrates, the father of medicine, at least for Greeks. Hippocrates himself said, "I am but a child of Imhotep," and much like Pythagoras, existed 2,000 years after the death of Imhotep. If you read the Hippocratic Oath, the very first line says this: "I swear by Apollo, the physician, and Asclepius." That's Imhotep. So, Hippocrates, and also Herodotus, the father of history for the Greeks, praised and thought very highly of Imhotep as a forerunner or a trailblazer in their respective fields, as well as medicine, science. But somehow, some way, he's lost over time. We don't think or know about Asclepius or Imhotep in our time. Okay, another one. Where are we and what is this? Sorry, I'm in your way. Where are we and what is this? History buffs, archaeologists, the Mayans, you saying? Well, some of these do exist in areas where the Mayans did live, however, this predates the Mayans. You can find these, yes, in Mesoamerica and also in Mexico. These are known as Olmec heads from the Olmec society that existed well before the Mayans. This is Western Hemisphere. These structures, these statues, if you will, are large, the largest ones being about 10 feet tall, right? And they're heavy, they're huge. No one transported these, at least by water, anywhere. Because of the size and the weight, the heft of these things. And you can see that the features have broad noses and big lips and, well, high cheekbones. And it's believed that these, and there's not just one, there are many of these that are on the landscape of Mesoamerica. I was also told that there are 2 of them right now in New York City at one of the museums. Natural history, I believe, to go check that out. But I've seen them in person myself in Mexico, and they're huge. They're believed to have been carved by people who lived in Mesoamerica, of people who visited them from other part of the world, that is African. More evidence of people who were African in this part of the world is this piece of gold here. Gold was called guanine by the Malian Empire, West Africa, and when Columbus sailed here, he wrote in his journal, he wrote in his journal that the people in this part of the world, Western Hemisphere, called gold guanine, the same term that the Malayan people called gold from West Africa. They also wore outfits that had Malayan symbols on them as well. Another thing to note about Columbus, I was taught as a young person that he was lost. He kind of stumbled into the Western Hemisphere en route to India. Not true. Per his own writings, and I don't know why folks didn't know that. His writings have been available for hundreds of years. But he had maps. He had some maps. Folks who'd been here before. Well, who had been here before? Well, the Malian Empire, right here, that's outlined in red, is West African Empire that existed in the 1300s. Anybody know who a guy named Mansa Musa was? Ooh, I see your hands, yes. Who's Mansa Musa?
He's the really rich, like, leader.
He was known to be the richest person ever to walk the earth. I don't know if that's true now with some of these robber barons that run things, but up until a few years ago, the richest person ever to walk the earth, and he ran the Malian Empire, but he had an older brother who abdicated the throne to him because he had the desire to travel the world via ships. Let's first deal with Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, Mali Empire, extremely wealthy man. He was a Muslim, which meant at some point he had to take a Hajj to Mecca. On his Hajj to Mecca, he brought with him 300 camels with 300 servants and 300 big bags of gold. And he took a little stop, a little siesta in Cairo, Egypt, where he spent some of his wealth, but spent so much of it that it ruined the economy of Egypt for a decade. He just really crashed the economy with his money that flooded into that system. That became legendary. And that story carried all the way into Europe, where Europeans found, well, wow, they've got that much gold there. Let's start doing some trading with them. And that guy I mentioned before, Columbus, before he sailed on behalf of Spain, sailed on behalf of Portugal, and sailed to West Africa to a place called Ghana, where he traded in gold there before becoming one who traveled this part of the world. You see maps from the Malayan people in West Africa at that time. And there's a place, it's present day, in Ghana called Elmina, or the mine, the mine, where they would store the gold. And for centuries, gold would be stored there until they realized that there's some other commodities that are much more valuable than gold, because people create more people. Gold does not create more gold. So what had been the trade in gold became the trade in people, starting in Elmina, Ghana, West Africa. But back to his brother. Mansa Musa's brothers, Abubakar II, the voyager king, he sent a flotilla of 200 ships westward from Africa into the Caribbean and into Mesoamerica, South America, and North America. And they used what's called the trade winds to do it. If you ever experience hurricanes, those hurricanes begin, they have their origin in West Africa, and of course they're powerful, they build up strength as they go westward toward the Caribbean and the United States and South America. They use those trade winds on ships with sails to make their way into the Caribbean. There's evidence of them being in Brazil, in also Mesoamerica, and also the Caribbean, and they created maps from their voyage. They were the first cartographers, or let's say second cartographers. The first ones were people who lived in Iraq, but the second wave of cartography was West Africa. More evidence of West Africans being in the Caribbean is this, the Tiffanyog script, found in St. John, Virgin Island. Which is a Rosetta Stone of sorts. The Rosetta Stone that kind of translated Egyptian hieroglyphs into Greek. This kind of gives you examples of Malian speech, or actually the Berbers written language that dates back to before the Common Era. That was found in the Caribbean, right? So we think of, some think of Columbus as being a discoverer, which can't be true because people were already anyways, but think about it, if people from Asia had already been here, they had through the Bering Strait. If folks from Africa had been here, and they had through what we just talked about, it really kind of meant that the last ones here were Columbus and his folks. That's the first, right? He's not the first, but the last. They could not discover a place where people already existed, right? This kind of justifies claiming that people from West Africa had been here. Of course, Asian people had been here, and Columbus. Not even first for European Columbus, because the Vikings were Columbus as well. So, anyways, big movement. The maps that I mentioned Columbus had were given to him by the Malayans and also by Moors. The Moors invaded Europe from North Africa in the year 711 CE. For those who don't know, there's only a 9-mile stretch of ocean between North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, Portugal and Spain. And that's a very short area to traverse, and North Africans went and they occupied Portugal and Spain for 700 years. Oh, thank heaven for 711. If you've ever been to a bullfight, if you've ever seen the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain, you've seen evidence of the attitudes of Spaniards and Portuguese against those occupying Moors. That bullfight represents the killing of the Moors who had been in Spain and in Portugal for a long time. Actually, they worked westward also as far as Italy influenced what's called the Renaissance period. The Renaissance period comes about because of the influx of science, math, and culture that came from North Africa. We talked about math before, but algebra, which is an Arabic term meaning the broken pieces, al is the broken or missing pieces, came from North Africa. Of course, came initially from West Asia, and then across North Africa, and then into Europe during this period of 7-11. They introduced algebra to the Europeans, as well as the compass, cartography, as I mentioned before, and certain words into the lexicon, like orange or sofa, right? If you've been to Spain and seen structures like the mosque at Cordoba, Spain, those are Moorish elements to architecture there. When I was in Portugal over this past summer, after being in Cape Verde, I saw Moorish elements of certain types of tile and certain types of arches in buildings there that existed since the time of the Moors. It's amazing to see. And a little aside, I went to Cape Verde and Portugal, and there's a relationship there between the Portuguese and how they ruled over the Cape Verdeans and the riches they were able to experience in Portugal, like night and day. Question?
I just wanted to
Oh,
point
sorry, I
out, a
didn't know
lot
your
of
name
the
was
words in Spanish that start with AL came from Arabic.
Yes.
And they refer in a lot of ways to both riches that were wrought, so things like pillows,
Yes.
blankets, stuff like that, and also to technological advances. So the word well is alquiler.
Yes.
So they brought a lot of advancement.
Thank you for that. And just yell out next time.
And
I didn't see your
linguistic
hand.
advancement.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand, but just yell out next time. It's fine.
I
It's
just
fine.
wanted to throw that out.
Yes.
This might be a stupid question.
It won't be a stupid question.
If you're Egyptian, are you considered African or Middle Eastern?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a good question. Because Egypt itself had a number of waves of people who came in and out. It's almost like saying if you are someone who lives here right now, are you American, or do you talk about your origins before here? Because everyone who's here came from someplace else, right? Except for those who were indigenous. They even came from, at one point, Asia. So that's, I don't know. Nationalism is a tricky thing, and what you want to claim. It's not up to me to tell you what you are or somebody else is. What we can talk about is where we came from, but what you want to consider yourself is something totally different than where you came from. You're of Egyptian origin?
What?
You from Egypt?
I'm from Ghana.
Ghana?
Yeah.
Oh. Do you know about some of these things? You've ever been to like Elmina?
Yeah, I was there last February.
Hey, man, I want to see it. Right, so again, the Moors invaded Portugal and Spain in 7-11. They brought a lot of influence. They actually sparked the Renaissance. And who they were to people of that time, contemporaneous Europe, was someone that was, though they were feared, they were also in some ways revered for what they brought to Europe. Not that long after the Moors were run out of Spain, someone named Shakespeare wrote a play called Othello, where a Moor is the main character, Othello. And there's one passage in that play where Othello says, I'm sorry to spoil things for you if you've not read it, you're going to read it, you're in the middle of reading it, but I'll do it anyway. Sorry, English teachers. Othello kills his lover Desdemona. Desdemona, who is white. And he says after that, I'm going to paraphrase Othello, I have just thrown away a pearl worth more than all of my tribe, meaning the Moors. The Moors meant so much to Europe. When Shakespeare wrote that, he understood the audience would know at that very moment, Othello had descended into madness. There's no way one person could equal the accomplishment of the entire Moorish community, right? That's a signal right there. But let's think about what that might mean now for those who don't understand the Moors. For those who read that passage now without any understanding of what the Moors meant at that time, well, it means nothing. This person's valuable to them. But no, to understand the Moors and their impact at that time contemporaneously means, yes, this guy is now a madman. That's confirmation for the entire audience. Different effect now for folks who read it. Then the next thing we'll see is the Great Wall of Benin. We've all heard of the Great Wall of China, the only human-made object you can see from space. I'm not sure if you can see the Great Wall of Benin from there. Can't see the Great Wall. There it is. Here it comes. One more, I think. Yes. So the Great Wall of Benin, constructed between 800 AD and 1400 AD or CE, is also one that was constructed for purposes of fortification, right, to protect people from invaders. It still exists now. There's a picture down the bottom right there. You can walk between the walls of that Great Wall of Benin. One of the great architectural feats of the pre-mechanical era, and was noted as such in the Guinness Book of World Records. Yes, it's a scientific and architectural marvel for its time. How many of you are in or have had U.S. history? Most of you, right? You probably heard of the Louisiana Purchase. We have maybe some history folk who know about this too in the room. This white area right here was the land purchased by the United States. Who was the person who was really thought to be in charge of that purchase on behalf of this country? Who purchased that land? What's the person's name? Anybody know? Yes. Thomas Jefferson, yes. And I read in school that he was a wonderful, I guess, salesman or businessman, and he made this wonderful purchase, like pennies on the dollar, for this huge swath of land. If he had not done that, it would have been still probably the land of French, right? We wouldn't have from sea to shining sea in the United States. It would be this big, giant piece in the middle, at least, if not all of it to the west, that'd be French. But who knows what precipitated that? A man named Napoleon sold that land to Thomas Jefferson for a reason. You may know what led that to happen. Why did Jefferson get such a great deal on this piece of property? No one knows. What war? There's a war that happened not even part of this parcel of land. To the south, in the Caribbean, there's an island nation that Columbus went to called Hispaniola. Half of that island was, or is, DR, Dominican Republic. Other half is Haiti. Haiti was engaged in a fight for independence. Haiti, half of that island, even though it is such a small piece of land, was more profitable than the entire 13 U.S. colonies at the time. And as a result, it was a valuable piece of land that nations wanted to have under their control. At one point, the British controlled it. At the point, the Spanish, and last, the French. And it was the French that really suffered when the Haitians said, enough is enough. You've already beaten down the British and the Spanish. Now it's your turn. These are folks who have nothing but farming tools against the three most powerful military forces on the planet at the time. So after beating the British and the Spanish, it was the French's turn, and they beat down the French to gain independence in 1804. When that happened, Napoleon says, I don't want any part of this place anymore. The Western world, we're going to sell all of our pieces of land, our parcels of land, to whoever wants to buy them, whoever wants to take that off our hands to do it. He sells this swath of property to the United States, to Thomas Jefferson, very cheaply, so we can wash our hands of this part of the world. Yay, Haitian independence. But with that came a caveat. There was an embargo placed upon the Haitians, trade embargo. And though they've been extremely profitable, you're only profitable if you can sell your goods to somebody else. If you impose a trade embargo on a nation, they can't unload their stuff. You have a rotting fruit, rotting vegetables. You only can eat so much, right? So they're wealthy in terms of resources, but they've been locked out of the global economy, at least the Western economy at the time. And they fell into poverty. And they're still in a state right now where there's a lot of economic unrest and political unrest as a result of being locked out those many years ago, an embargo that in many cases is still in play. Although we do have some companies from Western nations like ours, I think of Levi's and Fruit Loom, that have set up shop there to construct things for, of course, cheap labor. But there's really no shot in the arm of the economy there in Haiti. You guys heard that before? I see a nod. I'm happy. Because if we don't talk about what made this thing happen, we don't understand how other nations are at play, how people like me are at play. And far often, these are not discussed when talking about Black history or U.S. history for that matter. This is a wonderful way to kind of wedge it into U.S. history. It's part of it. It's important. One of the people that was responsible For the Haitian Revolution is Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who's right behind me. This is Dessalines, very blurry picture of him. Another person who's also known to be a key figure is Toussaint Louverture, who kind of started the whole thing off, but would later die in France. He thought he could be a diplomat and go to France and kind of convince them to gain freedom from France. He would later die at the hands of the French or in French custody. But Jean-Jacques Dessalines was one who was engaged in battle, and again, they beat down the French to gain their independence. Funny, Napoleon comes up a lot of times in history. Napoleon, we can kind of link him also to the people that I mentioned before in ancient Egypt. I call it Kemet, you might call it Egypt. Egypt's a term that was kind of put upon those folk by the Greeks who came 2,000 years later. They called themselves Kemetans of Kemet. Anyway, Napoleon had since childhood revered someone named Tutmosis III, who was seen as the warrior king, actually a pharaoh or a Pharaoh. And what he didn't realize was that Tutmosis III looked like the very people he was enslaving in Haiti. Once he came to that realization, he was, well, he shook, to say it in common culture and vernacular, right? He had a hard time dealing with that. But he'd spent his entire life thinking about military and tactical strategy from Tutmosis III, only to realize that person did not look like him. Because, as was mentioned before, folk who live now and lived before in what we know as Egypt have changed over time, from sub-Saharan Africans to folk who are from Southwest Asia, even people from Europe have invaded that place. And Napoleon was really upset to find out that the people of the person of Tutmosis III was not looking like him. So yeah, I realized after looking at this slide, I didn't include a couple slides of women who are key in Black history. I have them in other presentations, and there's another one that's going around in terms of what is being put, is a slide that's being put out by teachers. One, we've all kind of placed slides in them. We've got some women in that as well. I can talk about a few of them if you'd like, but we know that Black history expands at least over 7,000 years. We're talking about Nabs Supply, the first thing we saw here. It's not only male, it's tied to the African diaspora, the spreading of Black folk throughout the planet, but it's not just in Western Hemisphere or Eastern Hemisphere, it's all over the planet. So I'm hoping that teachers, if they do honor and celebrate Black history, focus on places other than the United States in the last 400 years. Because if you think of slavery as being the beginning of Black history, then everything appears to be progress, right? There are no setbacks. I would like to think of it as slavery not being simply a part of Black history, but an interruption of Black history. It's not the entirety of it, it's not the origin of it, especially when you look back 7,000 years. By looking back and learning about Imhotep and folk like him, it dispels myths of Black inferiority and gives, I would hope, some appreciation for the cultures from which they come, right? I think that it's important not just for folks who live in this country who look like me, who are Black, but also for folks who don't look like me to appreciate Black history. If this school were entirely white, there should still be Black History Month here, right? We should all learn from this history, and it is a template for success, not just of those who look like me, but also everybody else to understand Black history. Time, how much time do I have? Oh, 8 minutes left, I still have more time. Okay, well, I'll open up to questions if you have some. Something seemed off that I said, or you're curious about something, I'll open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions? It's called wait time. I'll wait a few minutes to see if anybody has a question. Not even the adults in the room? Questions? Just blurt them out if you have them. Yes?
Is this presentation available, like,
I can make it available. I'll email it to you if you'd like. There's also the idea that if I do this and I make it available, do I eliminate my reason for being? Like if I just like every lesson that I have, I kind of send out. Oh no, just use this lesson. Well, I'll certainly send it to you. I had a question last time I was here yesterday talking about this, about male-dominated societies in history. And this kind of takes it out of the realm necessarily of black history, but I want folks to know that in the world, most societies originated as matriarchies or female-dominated societies. It's a not new thing, but it's new post the Paleolithic period, the Stone Age, that is a long time ago still, but that's when patriarchy started. Women were in control of most societies because they had something called the 7 blood mysteries. Human beings didn't know why certain things were happening in women's bodies. Menstruation, menopause, childbirth, right? These things that are happening in women's bodies, what's going on there? At some point, human beings figured out what was going on scientifically, and the mystery was over, right? And not only was the mystery over, there was anger on the part of men who said, we were duped into believing that women had magical powers. And as a result, certain things, certain symbols in our society were seen as negative or evil because they tied women with being evil, thus the idea of a witch, right? Also, the number 13 was seen as being evil because the moon had 13 cycles every year, as the moon had 13 cycles every year, and thus the moon also was seen as negative. You might often see in Halloween depictions a witch, a woman, in front of the moon, also 13 cycles, right? And they align those two things, right? Even the idea that the moon has these magical powers to make people crazy was tied to women, right? The moon controls tides on the planet and also, in the mind of some folks, women's bodies, right? And to control the tide of women's bodies, the flow of women's bodies, the moon was an evil entity. And to cure the evilness or the wickedness from women, men erroneously decided to create a certain type of procedure that prevent them from being hysterical. A hysterectomy, right? Ooh, this is getting pretty morbid. But the idea of female-headed societies and the learning that they were not magical caused a lot of backlash from men. Thus we have witches, 13 being evil, moons being associated with being evil, and even the terminology of hysterectomy around taking out women's organs because it made them crazy or hysterical. That's ancient people, not us now, right? That being said, I went on a soliloquy there, a little bit of a tangent, but if there aren't any questions, I will let you go on your way.